From shining in Monaco, living like a celebrity, to a ruthless president who fought just to stay alive.
Wie wollen Sie ihn mal sterben?
Weiß ich nicht. Wenn's geht, alt, mit einer schönen jungen Frau.
These are Germany's most powerful Hells Angels bosses. But here's the catch. Not all of them got to choose how their story ended. Number 1. Necati Neco, Arabaci. He is among the most famous Hells Angels presidents currently on social media and known worldwide. He was born on February 14, 1972, in Cologne, Köln, West Germany, to Turkish parents. Necati's influence started during the 1990s, when he started gaining influence in Cologne's red light scene. Specifically, he worked with bouncers who were under his control and affiliated with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. By 1999, he controlled one of the most powerful pimp networks in Cologne's red light district. His influence stretched beyond Cologne to even Frankfurt, and in the early 2000s, his fingerprints were everywhere. Cologne's underworld became his empire, but violent ambition always carries a cost. In 2002, police finally caught up. He was arrested and charged with a series of crimes that include pimping, human trafficking, assault, extortion, weapons violation, and racketeering. Arabaci confessed to the charges during his trial in 2004, but prison could not stop him from pulling the strings. While in detention, he even planned to kill the prosecutor by hiring an Albanian contract killer. And in 2004, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. However, due to legal hurdles and errors in court documentation, Arabaci was acquitted of additional charges. Finally, he was released in 2007 and deported to Turkey. But he reinvented himself in Monaco again. The street enforcer was now a billionaire biker boss, surrounded by luxury cars, exclusive clubs, and armed bodyguards. From Monaco, his influence stretched across Europe. His network extended from Germany to Turkey, across the Balkans, and deep into North Africa. He brokered deals between mafias, biker gangs, and even state-linked operatives. And finally, in 2010, he was appointed president of the Hells Angels MC Nomads Turkey. In 2015, Spanish authorities issued a European arrest warrant, EAEW, for Arabaci. But his Turkish citizenship complicated the enforcement, and Turkey does not extradite its own citizens. But power at that scale doesn't stay untouchable forever. By 2025, Interpol had him high on their list. And in September, Slovak police, working with German authorities, stormed a luxury restaurant in Slovakia during an undercover operation. Inside, they found Arabaci with his associates. But authorities could not detain him longer, and after a few hours, the biker boss was free again. One thing about Necati is established that he knows how to maintain the balance of power and avoid controversies while maintaining a strict hold. Number 2. Aigun Muchuk.
Wie wollen Sie ihn mal sterben?
Weiß ich nicht. Wenn's geht, alt, mit einer schönen jungen Frau.
This is Aigun Muchuk speaking to reporters in 2016, and he mentions that he didn't want to die anytime soon. But what he didn't know was that the countdown had already begun, and he has only 28 days left to live. And on Friday, October 7th, 2016, Aigun Muchuk was found dead by the cleaner for the clubhouse in Wettenberg in Gießen. But how come a Hells Angels president is targeted so easily in his own clubhouse? The story leads back to a long rivalry with fellow Hells Angels brothers. And this was not the first time he was attacked. Just 2 years prior, on July 2nd, 2014, Muchuk had been wounded by gunshots outside a Frankfurt club. But why was Aigun Muchuk fighting his own brothers? And why was he being attacked multiple times? The story leads back to Muchuk's origin. He was born in Germany to Turkish parents and joined the Hells Angels under the leadership of Walter Burkhard, commonly known as Schnitzel Walter. Back then, the club was dominated by old-school traditionalists. But as the years went by, the face of the gang began to change. More Turkish and Kurdish recruits joined, reshaping the balance of power inside the chapter. That shift became Muchuk's opportunity. and he rebelled, undermining his leaders first behind closed doors, and later the rebellion turned open. Rallying the younger migrants who now made up a big chunk of the membership, Muchuk challenged the old guard Schnitzel Walter directly. The violence forced the American Hells Angels leadership to intervene. To stop Germany from tearing itself apart, a deal was struck. In November 2014, he emerged from the hospital as the president of Gießen, transformed into both a symbol and a threat. On the other hand, Schnitzel Walter, despite all his power, could not contain Muchuk, and Muchuk was not only able to dodge expulsion, but also received permission to start his own charter. Muchuk's predominantly Turkish faction was granted its own charter in Gießen. For the first time, a breakaway chapter had officially been recognized, not crushed. By then, Muchuk was considered one of Europe's most important outlaw figures. Muchuk rose to the top, becoming the face of a younger, more diverse wave of bikers inside Germany. But his rebellion came at a price, one that would be paid in blood. The tussle between the two factions continued in September 2016. Outside a former U.S. Army barracks in Wettenberg, the clubhouse of the Gießen chapter, he was found dead. He had been shot multiple times, left lifeless in the very stronghold he had fought to build. Looked like this time, his luck had run out. Authorities did not have any person of interest, but no one was convicted. Law enforcement immediately suspected the Frankfurt West End charter, pointing specifically toward Burkhard's inner circle. For investigators, the motive seemed obvious: the long-running feud between Frankfurt and Gießen. Yet, despite collecting surveillance footage and forensic evidence, police couldn't make arrests. Muchuk's assassination sent shockwaves through Germany's outlaw biker scene. He had been a symbol of change, a man who dared to defy tradition to lead a chapter built on migrant strength. Number 3. Walter Burkhard. Schnitzel Walter. Born in Frankfurt in the 1960s, Burkhard grew up in a divided Germany. Walter Burkhard, also known as Schnitzel Walter, had a very humble beginning. He stared from a butcher's shop in the affluent neighborhoods of Frankfurt. While the nation was undergoing rapid modernization, pockets of society remained deeply traditional. Burkhard trained as a Fliermeister. He ran a successful meat shop known for quality and freshness. But behind the scenes, Walter was drawn to a different kind of brotherhood, and eventually following his, he joined the Hells Angels motorcycle club and soon became an integral part of the West End charter in Frankfurt. The Hells Angels had long established a presence in Germany, but the Frankfurt West End charter was different: wealthy, urban, and well-connected. His butcher shop remained a front and local landmark. But behind the scenes, the chapter engaged in weapons trafficking, drug distribution, nightclub protection rackets, debt collection through intimidation, and territorial enforcement across Frankfurt's red light and entertainment districts. Under his leadership, the West End chapter started operating like an organized crime syndicate. Burkhard knew how to instill fear without ever raising his voice. But in 2012, Burkhard faced resistance from where he expected the least. The blow of hot air came from within the club. Turkish and Kurdish origin members like Aigun Muchuk began forming their own powerful factions within the club. Despite Walter's attempts to maintain control, his chapter was divided. But 4 years late, the rebel president was found dead in his clubhouse. He had been shot multiple times in the head and upper body at close range. Law enforcement responded with a sweeping crackdown. Police raided Hells Angels clubhouses in Frankfurt, Wiesbaden, and other cities. Dozens of members were arrested on unrelated weapons or drug charges, and then Burkhard vanished from public view. Unlike many of his counterparts, Walter Burkhard was never arrested for Muchuk's murder. Burkhard continued to pull strings behind the scenes, operating through intermediaries and loyal club veterans. In 2024, another shocking incident brought Burkhard's name back into media focus. A brutal Hells Angels brawl at Frankfurt Airport involving members from multiple chapters. Though Burkhard was not present, several West End affiliates were. Burkhard was fined in court and was ordered to pay 10,500 euros in fines. He never gave interviews, he never testified, he never confessed. And in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, That silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. Number 4. Kadir Padir. Padir was a member of the Bandidos in Germany, and he left the club. After defecting from the Bandidos in 2010, Padir joined the Hells Angels and quickly climbed the ranks, becoming president of the Hells Angels Berlin City chapter. The Berlin chapter was notorious for running drug routes, protection rackets, and illegal gambling halls. He had an iron fist control over the club and territory. But in 2014, everything changed. On 10th January 2014, inside a betting office in Berlin-Reinickendorf, a sympathizer of the Bandidos was shot dead inside a betting shop. He was identified as Tahir O, 26. 13 masked men entered the betting shop and fired 8 shots, 6 of which hit Tahir O, and he was killed.
Betreten. Einem Rollkommando gleich stürmen, wie sich später herausstellen wird, Hells Angels das Café. Hier die Originalaufnahmen aus der Überwachungskamera. Innerhalb von nur 5 Sekunden ab. Nach nicht einmal 30 Sekunden haben die Täter den Laden wieder verlassen.
When the authorities investigated, they traced the link to this killing to Kadir Padir. He was accused of being the instigator of that killing. The prosecution alleges he played a leadership role in ordering or organizing the attack. The trial began in 2014 and lasted for several years. In court, Padir faced accusations of running his charter like a mafia syndicate, giving orders that turned disputes into executions. But the real shock came from inside his own circle. Kasra Zargaran, once a trusted associate, turned against them. He turned state witness in the betting office murder trial. Zargaran described in his testimony the details of how Padir's orders flowed from the top down. He painted Padir not just as a biker boss, but as the godfather of Berlin, the man who decided who lived and who didn't. Finally, in 2019, judges at a Berlin court delivered verdicts. Padir was sentenced to life imprisonment for his role as the instigator in that murder. And in 2022, his appeal was also rejected. The German federal court upheld the sentences for several Hells Angels in that case. But Padir's influence didn't die with the verdict. Sentenced to a long prison term, he proved that bars couldn't hold his reach. Investigators say encrypted phones and loyal visitors turned his cell into a command post. Even from prison, debts were collected, rivals were silenced, and orders still carried his name. And that's the paradox. Kadir Padir sits locked in a cell, but Berlin's streets still whisper his name. If a murder trial and a prison sentence couldn't strip him of power, then what can? Number 5. Ramen Yaktaparast. Ramen's story doesn't follow the usual outlaw biker script. He was an Iranian German and once a rising member of Bandidos, but he switched to other gangs and finally landed in Hells Angels. There, he quickly rose to ranks and became president of Hells Angels' MG City Charter in Mönchengladbach. He was already notorious to the police for his violent past, and had also been involved in murdering another biker. But his story took a darker turn when he became an asset to the Iranian government, specifically Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Iran benefited from his fugitive status, and his outlaw connections made him valuable. He became a bridge between the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and criminal networks in Europe. One of his assignments included an arson attack on a Jewish synagogue in Germany. And when the authorities traced back the link to him, he fled to Iran and mocked German police on Instagram. Germany does not have an extradition treaty with Iran, so he was living a free life out there until the haven could not protect him anymore. But on May 9th, 2023, Yaktaparast was shot dead in Tehran, the place he considered a safe house, allegedly in an operation carried out by Mossad. While IRGC continued to deny his affiliation with the force, his obituary referred to his death as martyrdom, and he was buried in Section 19 of Behesht Zahra Cemetery, reserved for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members. And now, one question lingers. If a single outlaw boss could be turned into an international agent, how many more shadows like Ramen Yaktaparast might already be at work? Number 6. Frank Hanebuth. Frank Hanebuth was born and raised in Hanover, Germany. At that time, the biker scene was already violent. But Hanebuth stood apart because he wasn't satisfied with just being another rider. He wanted absolute control. He had already managed to climb to the top of the Hells Angels chapter in Hanover. Under his rule, rival clubs quickly learned that crossing him came with serious consequences. But Hanebuth's ambitions didn't stop at Hanover. In 2009, he turned his attention to Mallorca, Spain. For most, it was a tourist paradise. For Hanebuth, it was the perfect stage to expand his empire. There, he built a Spanish chapter of the Hells Angels right in the heart of the island's nightlife, transforming the beaches and bars into a stronghold for his power. Strip clubs, bars, and large parts of the nightlife economy fell under his crew's control through violence and intimidation. Money flowed in through luxury cars, high-end real estate, and businesses that looked legitimate from the outside. But soon, the investigators found their criminal empire disguised as success. On 23rd of July 2013, Frank Hanebuth was arrested in Mallorca by the Spanish. 200 officers raided 25 properties across Mallorca, seizing cash, luxury vehicles, weapons, and computers. After his arrest, he was sent to solitary confinement and remained in pre-trial detention until July 2015 and was released on bail of 60,000 euros with conditions to report regularly to the police. But years later, in January 2023, a major trial began in Madrid. Hanebuth once again faced charges of membership in a criminal organization, money laundering, and illegal possession of firearms. Prosecutors requested a prison term of up to 13 years and fines of 4 to 4.5 million euros. But on 26 September 2023, Spain's High Court in Madrid acquitted Hanebuth and his co-defendants of the main charge of belonging to a criminal organization, ruling that it could not be proven. Number 7. Mario Ampman. He was known as the man for the rough stuff, but his journey with the biker world did not start with Hells Angels. He began with a relatively less famous bike club named Bloody Devils, a one-of-only kind of gang at that time with the motto of strike first, ask questions later. In 1971, Mario Ampman thought of something that would transform him from being a local boss to an internationally recognized figure. He sent his associate to the USA and asked the original Hells Angels for permission to open a chapter in Germany. Thus, they founded the first German charter of the Hells Angels, and soon they became one of the most powerful gangs in Hamburg, Germany. But to fuel their power, they started extortion. They would go into bars, vandalize the furniture, urinate on the bar, and indiscriminately beat patrons. As this was not enough, they opened one of their own clubs, Angel's Place. And to wipe out the competition, they started terrorizing the local landlords, collecting protection money. Anyone who didn't pay the stay fee received visits. The bikers repeatedly crashed their motorcycles into the bars. So, the authorities caught up to them. And in 1983, the police took action. 500 officers carried out a raid. The Hells Angels and their symbols got banned in Hamburg. This was a major setback for the Hells Angels, but they regained power soon after the trial ended in the club's favor. Some of the members were sentenced to prison, and after serving a few years in prison, they were back on the streets. And soon they were back to extortion, drug trafficking, prostitution, arms smuggling, and this time they expanded their operations. Mario Ampman, 2017, one day after his 69th birthday, Hamburg hosted his funeral. Over 200 bikers from across Germany and Europe rode in to pay their respects. The funeral unfolded under heavy surveillance, with plainclothes officers and covert intelligence units watching closely, fearing rival attacks or power struggles. Number 8. Darius F. In Hamburg's biker world, few names carried as much weight as Darius F. He was sergeant-at-arms at Hells Angels, a third highest rank in hierarchy. Darius was not only responsible for maintaining order and discipline within the club, but also was at the forefront of the drive to push the rival gangs, especially Bandidos and Mongols, out of the city. Because whoever controlled Hamburg's underworld also controlled its nightclubs, protection rackets, and drug routes. And for years, Darius made sure that control belonged to him. His dominance seemed untouchable. Until one night on August 26, 2018, Darius was driving his white Bentley, leaving his favorite pizzeria, Palermo, in Hamburg. Everything seemed perfect until a Mercedes next to him lowered its window. A gun appeared and shot 5 bullets to his head and upper body. Darius was attacked. It was an assassination attempt. But against all odds, Darius survived. Still, the attack left permanent scars on his body. He was paralyzed from the waist down. Once feared enforcer was now confined to a wheelchair. When the authorities investigated the attack, it was traced back to old rivals. The plot was commissioned by ex-members of the Mongols and led by an individual named Darius R and his girlfriend, who wanted revenge for a failed hit against them 2 years earlier, an attack they believed had been ordered by the Hells Angels themselves. And finally, Darius R was sentenced to life. His girlfriend received more than 12 years behind bars. But then the case took a shocking turn. The girlfriend confessed in court that she alone had planned the shooting. With that single admission, the case flipped, opening the door for Darius R to escape his life sentence. The attack on Darius F was proof of a brutal truth that in the outlaw biker world, sometimes the deadliest threats come from men who once sat across the same table. And by surviving, Darius's name moved from feared enforcer to living legend, a man who took 5 bullets in broad daylight and still lived to tell the tale. Number 9. Frank Weber, the architect of Berlin's Hells Angels. Frank Weber was one of the most respected Hells Angels in Europe. Before his name became synonymous with Berlin's biker culture, Weber made his mark as a skilled tattoo artist. He opened the Kreuzstich Tattoo Studio on Adalbertstrasse and went on to found Europe's oldest tattoo convention. His Berlin Tattoo Convention drew bikers and enthusiasts from across Europe and even America, turning Kreuzberg into a meeting point of biker tradition and ink culture. Weber's journey into the biker world began in 1977 when he started his first motorcycle club. Just a few years later, in 1981, he opened his first shop selling Harley-Davidson equipment. By 1990, he had co-founded the Berlin branch of the Hells Angels, cementing his place in biker history. Unlike the newer generation of angels who leaned toward drug trafficking and protection rackets, Weber was a traditionalist. For him, the club's core identity was about motorcycles, tattoos, brotherhood, and nights spent drinking beer, not business empires built on crime. This old-school stance earned him respect far beyond Berlin. When Weber passed away at the age of 66 after a long illness, it felt like the end of an era. His funeral in Berlin on November 2nd, 2024, became a spectacle of loyalty and power. More than 1,000 mourners filled the streets, including Hells Angels from the US, Canada, Turkey, and across Europe. A roaring procession of motorcycles thundered through the city, leading to his burial at Grossgirchenstrasse Cemetery in Schöneberg, where other Hells Angels also rest. For many, Weber's death wasn't just the loss of a man. It was the closing chapter of Berlin's traditional biker spirit. Legends die, leaders fall, but the Hells Angels in Germany remain. And when one boss is gone, another is always waiting in the shadows. Click on the next video to see how that same fight for power plays out across the most notorious motorcycle clubs in America.